Welcome into the Lions 24/7 podcast. We waited a little bit on a Thursday because we anticipated some big news, and it came. Andy Kotelnicki is the name of the new offensive coordinator for Penn State. They go out to Lawrence, Kansas, and prime away from the Jayhawks after some success out there, after an 11-year run alongside Lance Leipold, who's the head coach out there at Kansas. And now James Franklin is his new boss, and we've heard he wants a head coach for the offense, and it would be Andy Kotelnicki moving forward, replacing Mike Yurcich, who was dismissed after a Game 10 loss against Michigan this season. We welcome Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan right off the top of this show. If you're watching on YouTube, we appreciate that. And if you've been waiting for this one to drop on your podcast, we appreciate that as well. I think we're going to bring another episode on Friday, do our best to get a little more intel from Kansas's ends of things. We'll also talk about the transfer portal because there's a lot of things happening there. But this episode, we're going to spend it all on the new guy in town. Daniel, you had the breaking news story. This was a collaborative effort on all our parts throughout the week. And since really Tuesday at Lions 24/7, Andy Kotelnicki has been the name to know in this coaching search.
Definitely. And I think one thing that if you're trying to gauge this hire, you just look at the reaction from around college football. It seems like from people that are in the know, that people are very, very excited about this hire, very impressed with this hire. And it's something where the more that I learned about Andy Kotelnicki and going through the preparing for this possibility, the more and more that he stood out as a very big quality candidate. I think that when his name first popped up, your head immediately goes to Lance Leipold at Kansas. Andy Kotelnicki is someone who has been with Leipold for a long time, dating back to D3 Wisconsin Whitewater. And then you kind of go through the reputations of being a run heavy offense, and then that gets dispelled a little bit. And you look at the different kinds of personnel that was used, and you come out the other side with the portrait of a offensive coordinator who can do a lot of different things, can really adapt to his personnel. And above all, I think after what some Penn State fans saw this year, it seems like it's going to be interesting. It seems like that there's going to be different wrinkles. It seems like that Andy Kotelnicki is someone who's very creative in putting things together. So I think in terms of getting from Tuesday to Thursday, when this started to become a little bit more real, I came away very impressed, and I think pretty excited with what Penn State was putting together.
I'll explain why, and we'll get into exactly why this needed to be a strong pitch from James Franklin because of Kotelnicki's relationships established on that staff with the head coach at Kansas through 3 different regimes, 3 different schools. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's just tip our cap to the fact that Pat Kraft and James Franklin got this one done. This was a guy, based on our conversations this week, this was not just a Kansas versus Penn State situation. There were other hats on the table, as you might say, to steal a phrase. And so with Kotelnicki being that kind of a hot commodity and the college football landscape being what it is, not just in the transfer portal, but in the coaching market right now, it's like you got to have a plan before the guy hits the market, or you got to have a plan to go out and get that guy before someone else makes the proactive move. You're seeing that across the board. You're seeing different programs announce whether it's internal promotions or going out making some peculiar hires like we saw take place down in Fayetteville yesterday. But I think ultimately with Penn State, Mark, I mean, this is a move where James Franklin talks the talk about wanting to find this head coach of an offense. When you hear that, that's a pretty significant price tag. And when you're targeting a guy that has other sharks circling the water, got to be able to show up to the table with some legitimate plan and be able to swing that guy's attention. Clearly, it was enough to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things James Franklin's been talking about since Pat Kraft came on board is kind of the commitment to competing at the level that they want to compete. And I think this is a sure sign of this, whether, I know there's some people grumbling that this is a guy from the Big 12 and everybody puts up big numbers. But as Daniel said, if you look around college football at unbiased assessments of this guy, he is very well regarded. And if you look at what he's done under Lance Leipold, whether it was Buffalo, whether it's been at Kansas, just overall a track record of success. But I think the other really important thing is the timing. Being able to get this done now, not just from, we're still not clear on exactly when the official announcement hasn't come out. So it's going to be interesting to see when he'll actually join the program. Obviously, they're not going to turn the offense over to him before a bowl game. That's just not the way that things work. But I think the sooner that he can get here, absolutely, it will be the better. Just in terms of knowing personnel, getting familiar with the rest of the coaches, just getting familiar with the way that James Franklin does things. But beyond that, we have the transfer portal opening. You think about all the things that Franklin has to worry about. Whether it's making sure all of your commitments are solid, whether it's landing a couple more kids before signing day, whether it's, seeing who's available in that portal. And then the portal opens on Monday. And on Sunday, you'll know your bowl opponent. So this is taking a gigantic thing off of the plate ahead of all of that. And I can't tell you how important that is for the entire program. Now, let's see if something else might, Franklin may have something else he has to worry about pretty soon too, but that's neither here nor there at this point. To be able to get this done with this caliber of candidate, I think is super important, the timeline.
And Mark referencing there, Manny Diaz is no secret. His name has popped up in other jobs, and Duke right now is the prominent conversation right there after their coach goes to Texas A&M, and this game of musical chairs continues across the Power 5 landscape, and Penn State impacted, but they're also flexing their muscles a bit. And we'll talk about Manny Diaz down the line, but Daniel, when we talk about the instant impact, before we look big picture here with the addition, just what this looks like for December. Tomorrow's December. We'd imagine that Andy Kotelnicki is going to get announced officially by Penn State by the end of this week. We're not exactly sure when we'll see him in a press conference setting, but when that happens, we'll be front row, and we'll be trying to get down to the bottom about more about this guy. But between now and then, you've obviously got two co-offensive coordinators coming off a very strong finish to the regular season at Michigan State, Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell. And you've got a bowl game to prepare for. As Mark said, Sunday, we're going to know. And it's going to be a big-time opponent. Regardless, it's going to be a challenge to get that 11th win. So, Daniel, we were all there. Talk our listeners through a little bit what it looked like with Manny Diaz back in 2021 when he showed up in December, what we think that might look like this time around on the offensive side of things.
Yeah, I would think that we see something similar to what we saw 2 years ago before the Outback Bowl this month. Like you said, Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell are those co-offensive coordinators. They're most likely going to see this thing through to the bowl game. And I think that Andy Kotelnicki will just be an observer, that he'll be someone who is around, watching. I remember those practice. I think the one practice we got to see before we went to Florida, Manny Diaz is there, watching from a distance, talking to people on the sideline. I remember him down in Florida in the glimpse that we got to see where he's watching the defense, watching those linebackers, and then he was on the sideline during the bowl game, taking it all in too. So I imagine it'll be something similar. It's kind of like when Penn State made the switch, from Mike Yurcich, where that Rutgers game, we weren't expecting to see anything different. They weren't going to reinvent the wheel. And I don't think they're going to reinvent the wheel from, now till, December 29th, 30th, January 1st, whenever they're playing again. But this is a prime opportunity, though, for Andy Kotelnicki to get to know the personnel, to be in the building, to be around the players, get to know him, get to know them, for them to get to know him. And you can kind of build, I think this is a little bit more about building relationships at this point in the calendar. And that part that goes into coaching, a little bit more of the intangibles. They'll do all their install in the spring. But right now, he'll get to know the personnel. He'll get to see them up close. And then, come March, you'll go from there.
And in case some of these younger players and maybe veterans at Crossroads weren't a little anxious about December and working their way through practices and trying to make that impression, and we know there's tough conversations being had this time of year in team facilities with different guys on the roster, but now you got another set of eyes, and this guy's going to be calling the shots on offense come next year. As soon as you get those pads on in spring ball, he's the man you'll be turning to when you're out there on the field. So just another evaluation opportunity for the Penn State staff, and for those players out there who maybe didn't get their opportunities under the previous offensive coordinator. Maybe they feel like they didn't get as much run as they deserved, and for whatever reason, it's a month to make things happen. And I agree with Mark that we've heard from James Franklin call it a full-time job. to be pursuing a coordinator. And he said he doesn't really have time for 2 full-time jobs. That was before the Rutgers game. They got through the Michigan State game, and he kind of shifted right into it in post-game, didn't he, guys? He said, I got Zooms lined up all week. We got to hit the recruiting trail. I got to find an offensive coordinator. And Mark, you mentioned him getting that done. In terms of the fit of this guy on the staff initially, we've been told big personality and the type of personality where he's going to talk the talk, and he's going to coach confidently. He's going to express himself confidently. I think that's important. Some coaches are like that. Some coaches try to be like that, and it feels forced, and some coaches just don't even try at all. So I think this is the kind of staff where these guys, we've seen them on the camp circuit, we've seen them practice by practice, we've seen them on game days, after games. It's a pretty fun staff. There's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of vocal guys. So the fact that he brings that kind of cachet from a personality standpoint, I think is a great thing. What else you just have to acknowledge here, though, Mark, is he's splitting up with a lot of familiarity. Jalen Daniels, his quarterback out there, Jalen Daniels, I'm sorry, his quarterback at Kansas, fantastic run here since 2002 together. Prior to his back injury that ends up sidelining him for much of this season, going back to the start of 2022, 70% completion rate, 30 total touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So he's got his quarterback, and Daniels had already acknowledged that he was returning to the Kansas Jayhawks for the 2024 season. And you want to talk about who his boss is? Well, Lance Leipold is his boss going back 11 years, 3 different stops along the way. That includes his alma mater, Wisconsin Whitewater. Leipold was once a coach there. Kotelnicki was a player there. And now you see him getting the opportunity to make the move up to Buffalo together. We'll talk about that. They came to Beaver Stadium as Buffalo coaches not too long ago. And then they worked their way to the Power 5 conference in the Big 12 with Kansas, and they got a good thing going. Just kind of peeking our head over to that Kansas situation more and talking with people there. There's a lot of excitement brewing there. Maybe people are switched over to basketball this time of year typically, but they like how this football team is trending, especially with the Big 12 evolving and where Kansas was projected. Now, they lose a key component here, but Mark, we're talking about, again, going back to that pitch, going back to making this move. There was such a deep-rooted situation for this offensive coordinator. I'm not getting the mercenary vibe that we got with Mike Yurcich, where this guy's kind of leapfrogging his way through college football and trying to find the right quarterback and trying to find the right moment and then cashing in on it and capitalizing on it. And that's what a lot of offensive coordinators do. This guy was a lifer. We know he has head coach intentions, aspirations. You could understand if he could just wait it out a little bit longer, maybe under his same familiar situation. Maybe a year from now, the head coaching opportunity comes. Again, I don't think this is just about the dollars. This is about the ability to come to the Big Ten where the spotlight's never been larger. It's going to coast next year and being able to showcase what his offense can do with Penn State and Nittany Lions on the field.
Yeah, I mean, think of some of the recent hires that James Franklin has made. I mean, these are not guys who have been at 30 different schools, whether it's Anthony Poindexter or Marcus Higgins. I mean, Manny Diaz obviously is a different situation because he was coming off being a head coach. Ty Howell was a guy who he had been around a little bit, but obviously, Penn State roots. But these are not guys who've been around. But I would like to touch on something else that you hit on, and it's the personality. I'm looking forward to getting to meet this guy, and I don't want to be negative about Mike Yurcich, but anybody who was around that program, he was not the kind of guy that a lot of these dudes are. Kind of gregarious, kind of outgoing. That you see him at camp, they come over and bust your chops a little bit. He was kind of off. And I'm not saying it's wrong.
Mark, I'll say it. It felt like the media interaction was an inconvenience for Mike Yurcich every step of the way. I have no problem saying it. It's our job. It's his job. We're forced to stand together for 3 or 4 times a year. It felt like an inconvenience for him most of the time. Maybe not so much when things were going right. But that's just kind of the vibes you get. You don't get that from a lot of the other coaches, and we appreciate that.
But I guess my point is that could work for some people. I mean, it's worked for a lot of really good coaches. I'm not saying that makes somebody necessarily not a great coach, but I just wonder about that whole fit. And I don't think that change would have been made during the season if there wasn't a concern not only about maybe not carrying out the game plan, but the overall fit. Because one thing James Franklin said after that situation went down was that it wasn't just him, arbitrarily making this call. He did talk to some of his, the closest people on that staff. So I just from everything we're hearing, again, outgoing, kind of gregarious, that doesn't make you a great coach. But I just think in terms of fit within this staff, and all you have to do is look at some of the videos that we post from practice, or look at the video we posted, which we put as VIP because it included a little bit of choice language of the post land grant trophy game where Dex, you can see that that's kind of a different kind of dude than somebody who is just like kind of reserved. When you see Jaywan Sider at practice, I mean, he's a different kind of guy. So my whole point is I just wonder if part of this isn't only that this guy's a really good coach, but talking about that fit, because I think they've built a good thing here. You look at, and we'll see what happens in the portal this season, but they've not had a mass exodus every year, as some programs had. I think that you come off of the situation where the OC is fired and you lose your two biggest games of the year. And as soon as the regular season is over, two of your best players say, oh, no, I'm going to be back. Yeah, there's no question about it. So I think there's a lot of this that is it's more than just X's and O's. That's all important. And I will guarantee you that when James Franklin interviewed this dude, that he went over all that stuff because we know what a stickler he is. But I also think fit is important. And that's why I'm really looking forward to getting to know this guy. And I'll take it to another step. I mean, it's like Pat Kraft. Pat Kraft has that personality too. And I just think you're seeing a level of alignment. I wouldn't take that up to the school president. I don't think she's quite as gregarious, but she does have a sense of humor, as Daniel found out. But I just think that getting everybody kind of in alignment in personality wise, I think is part of this whole thing that Franklin's trying to do.
Yeah, personality aside, Daniel, you talked about digging around a little bit and liking more about Kotelnicki the more you learned. I was reviewing something up on Twitter, just kind of some of the favorite plays that he's produced, some two quarterback stuff. Just it seems like accentuating the athletes with their skill position. I mean, beyond their skill position, I should say. And I think one thing you see with his offenses time and time again is basically adapting to the personnel, whether a guy's injured and unavailable, like we saw this year at the quarterback position, or whether you've got a really talented quarterback that maybe doesn't fit what you did in the last place in Daniels, and you need to find some new skill. You need to actually implement his skill set into what you're doing. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to mesh and not with what James Franklin's been doing and not what necessarily Penn State's been doing in the past, but mesh with this personnel. And this is a team that has a former 5-star quarterback and a loaded running back room and a loaded tight end room. And that's not really going to change even if those top two tight ends move on. And they've got offensive line depth. And wide receiver obviously is a question mark. What do they have there? But to me, an offensive coordinator that is ready, willing, and able and has done it in the past to accentuate the areas on the field that his particular roster on a given week, not just a given year, but a given week, and be able to adjust and adapt accordingly. We'll see if it happens against Big Ten defenses. He's going to face the biggest test of his career thus far, but I like that part of his track record. Tell me what you see in that track record.
Yeah, it just seems so obvious when you say that having a coach who can adapt to his personnel is a good thing. But then you come across a case where you come across someone where that's not the case, and you're kind of like, it shocks you. I mean, at one of my old jobs, I covered an offense where there were a couple quarterback changes and they went back to a quarterback and they had a completely different offense. And the tacit acknowledgement was that the offense that quarterback was previously playing in was not tailored to his skill set, which when you hear that and when you're actually seeing it, it kind of blows your mind. But, in terms of going through who Kotelnicki has coached, I mean, you look at Buffalo, Tyree Jackson was the MAC Offensive Player of the Year back in 2018, I believe. 6'7", still athletic because he gave it a go as a tight end in the NFL, but not your stereotypical kind of jitterbug, dual threat. And then you look at what they had with Jalen Daniels at Kansas, who I would say is a true dual threat, and what he's been able to do And then they had success with Jason Bean, who I think is exclusively a runner, more or less, in the way that offense operated. And so the fact that he was able to coach all, just using those three guys as an example, you just have three quarterbacks with varying skill sets. Things were tailored to them and they made it work. I think you even look at the rankings for Kansas these past 2 years. In 2023, they're number 9 in rushing at 211 yards per game, number 68 in passing at 222 yards per game. But you look back 2 years ago in 2022, and they're number 41 in rushing, 183 yards per game, and 43 in passing, 254 yards per game. At the same time, though, the yards per play essentially doesn't change. So you're still accomplishing 7 yards per play, which ranked in the top 10 each of the past 2 years. But you're doing it in two completely different ways, and I think that there's something that really can be said for that. I know that it seems really obvious, but we've seen it so many times where things aren't necessary, that these coordinators aren't necessarily as flexible as they might make themselves out to be. Everyone says that they're multiple. Everyone says that they can make that. Oh yeah, we'll cater to these guys' strengths, but to actually see it. So I think that you see him come in. He's gonna have this 5-star quarterback in Drew Aller, who's going into his second year as a starter. I think that this is the type of coordinator who is going to look at that and say, all right, like, let's do it. What can we do around him? How can we use these guys around him to accomplish things? And I'm excited to see what that looks like. And you go a little bit further into the Kansas tape, a lot of stuff with two quarterbacks with Jalen
Hello. Yep.
Daniels and Jason Bean. And you think about what little what little Penn State showed this year with two quarterbacks. And I mean, what Kansas was doing, it makes this look like child's play for what Penn State was doing. So I just think that the fact that it's been evolving, it seems like the whole time that Kotelnicki and Leipold have been together, I think that that's just a really big positive, because that type of thing isn't a guarantee in this business, even though you would think it should be.
And what worked in 2019 on the field for you offensively, it just may run out of gas in 2023 based on the way this game evolves and how defenses adjust. And then you've got to change, and you can get paid a lot for a while based on a few successful seasons. But if you can't start to stack them up, then that's when you run into some trouble. And thus far, Kotelnicki, he's been a shining rocket in terms of his ascension thus far in this industry. And you look at how he was viewed right now, and last year, what we heard was Texas A&M, Notre Dame were prying around that situation. That's why you saw him add some money to his salary at Kansas. That's why you saw him add a title to his role at Kansas. And now, it wasn't just Penn State, as I said. One of the schools that we heard made overtures was Oklahoma. They ultimately went with a co-offensive coordinator plan on their end. But some big fish, as we said, circling. Pre-snap motion, that's something that I think stands out in terms of just getting a little bit more just excitement, even before that play's run, and seeing this team be able to use some of their blue chip athletes and putting defenses on their heels and trying to create some conflicts for the defenders. One thing that our guy Kevin Flaherty within the 24/7 Sports Network tweeted was a 325-pound offensive lineman lining up in the slot and doing pre-snap motion, giving him a full head of steam to throw a block. And my thought is, well, 350-pounder Venga Ioane already looks really damn good in the open field. Can we get him out there doing that? And this is the imaginative part that we get to all spend the next month and beyond doing. And that's part of this, Mark, is you've got a kind of a feel-good situation here where people are going to be able to, I think, move past the Michigan and Ohio State game in a way that probably couldn't happen until right now, because they can start to wrap their arms around a new offensive identity. We're going to wait till that really takes shape. But considering what we saw, 6 days ago in Detroit, what we're now seeing from what this guy has put on film at different levels of football, this has been a major step forward for James Franklin's offensive plan. And I have to imagine how it feels within that room, from Drew Aller to Nick Singleton to those wide receivers all the way through. There's got to be a lot more palpable excitement right now. And I understand it's going to be an adjustment. And you got Jaywan Sider and Ty Howell, and we got to consider what their roles are going to look like and what this means. And hopefully everyone's okay with their roles. But Mark, I just think there's a lot that has happened in the last week that has you feeling pretty good about where the ball is rolling. They got to put points on the board next September, but between now and then, there's a lot to like.
Yeah, the other thing I really like about, if you look at Kotelnicki's history, a balance between rushing and passing. And I think if we've learned anything in the Big Ten the last couple of years, is that you are not going to win this conference without being able to run the ball. I mean, you look at the biggest games in the conference this year, and the team that was able to run the ball was the team that was able to win. And if you look at when Penn State struggled the most, when it was unable to run the ball, it was unable to get the job done. So as much as people may focus on the different bells and whistles, I love the fact that you had this guy who's in the Big 12, and what does everybody automatically think about the Big 12? Well, all they do is throw the ball around. That's all anybody cares about. No, in the Big 10, you better have balance. And this year, 2,536 rushing yards, 2,672 passing yards. Now, the rankings in the Big 12 are a little different because teams tend to pass a little bit more overall, but I like the fact that you have that balance, and it's going to be fun over the next I'm so anxious for them to announce this so we can see the reactions of the players and whatnot, because I think we're not going to really hear much from the actual players until this is official. Although I do have a pretty good feeling we'll be hearing from some of the recruits, because I think Tyler Calvaruso is working on that.
I think.
Yeah, as we speak. So that part of it's going to be fun, but it definitely adds a level of excitement. And I think, again, it all goes back to, the personality. And so it's not just the personality in how he projects himself, but the personality of the offense as well. Able to have some fun. But again, while having fun, go back and look at the numbers. Every year there's balance. And that's what you need to win in the Big Ten.
Penn State's two quarterbacks, Bo Pribula, Drew Aller, this year combined for 36 total touchdowns, 2 total turnovers in 12 games. Sounds so pretty. We know along the way it wasn't quite that pretty every step. Daniel, this is obviously going to be we talk about priorities now and shifting to what's on the plate for Kotelnicki moving into Happy Valley. Once he's done shaking hands and introducing himself to everybody, when he gets to work and sinks his teeth in his things, that quarterback room is on the top of that list. So Drew Aller, Bo Pribula, what do you think about the match here? And what do you think ultimately, Daniel, is on that checklist for what he needs to get done between now and next spring with Drew Aller when they get on the field and start throwing balls against defenses together?
I think that both of these quarterbacks can fit in with what he wants to do. I think that your mind goes to Pribula first, just because he is more mobile, and we saw what they did with Jason Bean at Kansas, what Jalen Daniels was able to do. But I think that Drew Aller is one of those prospects where, if you're an offensive coordinator, kind of really no matter what your background is, you want to coach him and you want to have that opportunity, because he is that 5-star prospect. He really did tease his ability. We saw some mobility too, down the stretch. I wouldn't say he's a statue by any means, but he can make some things happen. So I think that the one thing that, as an offensive coordinator coming in, is you need to figure out how to really tailor what you want to do to what you have. I think the early impressions are, I have the confidence that that'll happen. In terms of the talent that Penn State has with Drew Aller. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see. I mean, you kind of brought it up, Tyler, where when you put this guy's system into what's already in place, how does it change? How does it morph? How does it adjust to what James Franklin wants to do? How does it adjust to what Jalen Sider wants to do with his running backs? What does it mean for Marcus Higgins and the wide receivers? What does it mean for Ty Howell and his tight ends? I'm really curious to see how all of those pieces fit together, because I think that especially the past 2 years, especially, we kind of knew what we were going to see from this offense under Mike Yurcich, especially once they got past that 2021 running game disaster and they had something that was pretty functional. It was kind of like you kind of knew what you were going to see. So I'm really curious to see how this looks different, how it's catered to different players, different position groups, and everything along those lines.
And then, Mark, the other obvious priority here is it's time to go shopping. And I hate to say it that way, but that's what it feels like with the transfer portal. It feels like both parties are kind of shopping in the transfer portal these days. And for Penn State, there's, you could say everyone can shout it from the rooftops. They need receiver help. They need internally for guys to develop and progress and be more productive next year. And they need to find some pieces externally, it would seem, beyond just their recruiting class, which, as we addressed the last episode with Tyler Calvaruso, only one early enrollee, one guy coming to campus in January. That's Josiah Brown, and he's going to be recovering from a pretty significant injury. So you're not looking at anyone from the freshman class being on camp for spring practice. Last year, we saw Malik McClain come to spring ball. We saw Dante Cephas come a little bit later in the year. Ultimately, the production left a lot to be desired. Cephas has started the last 4 games. He caught 3 passes last matchup, which is the most he's had other than that Maryland game. But we haven't seen him really rise up. And then Malik McClain's best work as a receiver came in week 1 of this past season. Both of them can be back in 2024. Harrison Wallace could be back for a bowl game potentially, but we expect him back in 2024. We're not sure about Keandre Lambert-Smith. All that aside, don't you feel like Andy Kotelnicki probably already has a folder of names at wide receiver, and now he's going to work with James Franklin and Marcus Hagans and trying to figure out exactly what to do next? They offered Texas a wide receiver out of Texas State today. Tyler Calvaruso has a write-up on that at Lions 24/7. But that's not going to be the final one, and it just feels like if this guy's going to try to patch together what he wants to do offensively, it's got to start by addressing the position room that leaves the most to be desired.
Right. And we go back to timing, right? So now you have this done again, whenever he's actually going to arrive in Happy Valley, we're not sure, but I have to imagine that he's going to be on the phone at least, or Zooms, or however the heck they do this stuff.
Mark, he may not come straight to Happy Valley with that recruiting. I mean, he may meet James Franklin at a high school somewhere.
That's very true. But again, I mean, think about the timing. If this thing dragged on, that now all of a sudden you have this transfer portal window, and I know it goes until after the bowl, but every day is so much more valuable. And to be able to go into this thing knowing that you need receiver help, and now the receivers will know what they could be getting themselves into, for lack of a better way of putting it. And that's one thing I haven't had a chance to do. Daniel, I don't know how much you've looked at it, but in terms of the success he's had developing receivers, in this offense and what they've been able to do, are you able to kind of show that to kids and say, listen, you'll have your opportunity? I mean, they obviously know that they have a quarterback who has a chance to be elite. I mean, that should be a really significant selling point, I would think. But I think we have to dive into the sort of success that his receivers have had through the years, and how much can you use that as kind of a selling point.
Daniel, there was some consternation maybe, and maybe some people still feel it after the hire, although I think some of that has kind of been swept away because they're just enjoying the right now with this new offensive coordinator coach. But some people are thinking, well, if this is just a one and done thing, if he's really successful in year one and then he moves on, well, you're in the same spot, and James Franklin's looking for another offensive coordinator and a year from now. And my response is, well, then it went really well. And you're probably not going to have to worry about it. You're probably in the college football playoff if it goes that well, but maybe you're not. But I think, Daniel, ultimately, that's really something that fans should really not be hung up on in this day and age of college football. It's the climate of college football. I think you may sign a guy to a 3-year contract, but you understand that if it's going well, you're going to have to, meet really soon probably and talk about a pay raise and retaining a guy, because there'll be other competition for him. And if it's not going well, you're probably not going to let him see through that 3-year contract, because you're going to have to make a move and you're going to have to bring somebody else in. And in my mind, a guy like Andy Kotelnicki, who head coaching jobs, I would imagine will be on the table if he can come and duplicate success and do it on the big stage under the bright lights here with some of these Big Ten matchups next fall. What say you about that? I mean, am I off the mark there, or do you think it's just dandy for a head coach like James Franklin to go all in and say, if this is a 1-year deal, let's make it a really good year? It felt like that was maybe the case with Manny Diaz, and then you got a second year and it was amazing, and now you're trying to scrap and claw to get a third year.
Yeah, I think you look at these coordinator positions at a big school like Penn State, and I think that you have to look at them as things that need to be there that can be mutually beneficial. Where for someone like Andy Kotelnicki, when he comes in, it's something where he can help Penn State and Penn State can help him in terms of he can come to Penn State, help them get into the college football playoff, potentially make some noise, elevate a player like Drew Aller, like Nick Singleton, like Katron Allen, and then Penn State can help Andy Kotelnicki get that next job. I think that that's kind of how you have to look at it, and I think that at this level you don't really have the longevity of being an assistant, and I think that that's just kind of what this business is, and I think that Andy, and man, this last name has really been tripping me up the whole time. Uh,
Kotelnicki.
but yeah, Kotelnicki. I mean, you look at his background. He's been with Lance Leopold for 11 years, which is kind of really insane to think about. How long someone is with a coach. I mean, we talk about Jaywan Sider being on James Franklin's staff for 6 years as being some kind of mind blowing accomplishment in this day and age of college football. So I think that maybe at the lower levels, maybe when you're at a Wisconsin Whitewater, moving up to a Buffalo, moving up to a Kansas, that sort of, keeping the band together, it really does make sense. But I think that when you get to this level, it changes a little bit because the margins for error, are pretty slim in the negative, and then in the positive, when you're good, everyone's going to want you. So I think that I wouldn't say this is exactly similar to the Manny Diaz situation, just because I think that everyone saw how that ended at Miami, and in terms of how that ended. But I do think that this is someone where if Penn State is in that, college football playoff conversation next year, that Andy Kotelnicki is someone that people are going to be talking about. So we'll see, but I think that you kind of almost have to look at these things as year to year a little bit. With coaches, and then almost now with players in the transfer portal, it's just kind of the nature of the business because everything's based on results. And if you get the results, good things are going to happen, and someone might move on. And if you don't get results, things are going to happen. Someone might not be back.
And we did get an official announcement from Penn State while
Unreal.
recording this podcast that the annual blue-white game is now scheduled for April 13th, 2024. We were wondering about that, actually, but a little bit earlier than normal. We did just get that announcement, though, from Penn State about the annual blue-white game. Still waiting on one on Andy Kotelnicki. But
Well, now we know when he'll be running the offense for the first
exactly. That's the first time where people can pack into Beaver Stadium and get frustrated about what they're not seeing from his offensive attack. So it'll be a good opportunity for all of us to get out there. And by the way, Mark, is there anything we left off the table that you think is worth mentioning right now? Because a lot of moving parts the last few days, and for Penn State to get this done here on Thursday late afternoon and going public in some ways through reporting. Any kind of reaction overall as we kind of summarize the last couple days and James Franklin's 2 weeks here looking for an offensive coordinator?
No, I'll just go back to what I started with. I think the timing of this thing is so important. And for anybody out there, stay tuned to the site. We'll have more coverage on this. Tyler Calvaruso will be letting you know, and I'm sure some of our other outstanding network recruiting people will be giving feedback on how this impacts Penn State from that perspective and the transfer portal and all those different things. But Daniel did a really nice job. Tyler, you did a great job kind of spearheading everything and getting the scoops and whatnot and getting stuff on the message boards. Daniel putting that story together at a moment's notice. It's not like we had that thing written in advance or anything, but just, I think it speaks to the team coverage. I think Tyler Calvaruso pitched in, Dome pitched in, everybody pitched in, and to have support from the network as well when we're going through this sort of thing is just absolutely outstanding. So great job by everybody. I think this worked out really well for Penn State. Really anxious to see when they announce Andy, and it's going to be fun to get to know him.
I told our listeners on Tuesday that we were going back to the 2 episode per week, and Tuesday and Thursday we might sneak another episode your way between now and next Tuesday. So just keep an eye on wherever you find your podcast, because there's so much to cover right now. The transfer portal about to open wide open. It already feels like it's about halfway open across college football. The recruiting landscape is going to change on Friday as coaches are able to get out and about again and go visit prospects. So there'll be a lot going on there. And of course, we're going to learn a lot more about this new offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, who is coming here into Happy Valley with a really impressive personnel group. We'll see what he can do with it. All right, fellas, appreciate the perspective and the coverage this week, and we'll talk to you both real soon. For on behalf of all of us here in the Lions 24/7 family, this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.